one of the most interesting and debated episodes in this time is the final days of Samaria, the last capital of the northern kingdom, the kingdom of Israel. In the second book of Kings, in chapter 18, we read how Shalmaneser V, who was the successor, the son of Tiglath-Pileser III, was the king, the Assyrian king, who laid siege on Samaria, and after 3 years conquered it. But when we compare the evidence that we have, the extra biblical evidence coming from the inscriptions, the royal inscriptions of the successor of Shalmaneser V, Sargon II, it seems that Sargon was the one that conquered Samaria. How did this happen? It seems that Shalmaneser really started a siege on Samaria, as the Bible tells us. And the siege was very long, 3 years. How come that Assyria besieged Samaria for 3 years? When we learn about the history of the Neo-Assyrian Empire during that time, what happened in Assyria proper, we see that during that time, Shalmaneser V was replaced by Sargon II, who was a member of the royal family, and he took the power in a coup d'etat and finally took the throne in Assyria proper. So it seems that it was Shalmaneser that started the siege on Samaria, but Sargon resumed it. The biblical text also mentions the locations where the deportees from the northern kingdom, what we call the 10 lost tribes, were taken and settled. We see here in the map the town of Gozan and the river Habur, which are in northern Syria of today, west of Assyria proper, and also to the town of Media, which is western Iran of today. So if we want to look for the 10 lost tribes, we probably have to search in those areas. Sargon II, who founded a new dynasty, decided, like a very known figure from the Bible, King David himself, and also Omri, the king of Israel, to found a new capital, meaning now we're going to start over a totally new thing. So he chooses a place, buys the place, compensates the locals that were evacuated from the site, and he's now going to build Dur Sharukin. We can compare this name to Sargongrad. Okay, this city was inaugurated in 707, 2 years before Sargon actually lost his life in battle. So it means that in most of his career as a king, Sargon spent building his new capital. In the images that you see in front of you, you can see the reconstruction of the royal complex in Dur Sharukin, and we see that it's an acropolis. It's like a fortified area within the capital, which includes a palace and a temple. And the temple complex also includes the ziggurat, not the same, but similar ziggurat that we saw before in the city of Ashur. From the palace that Sargon built, his palace in Dur Sharukin, the modern name of this site is Khorsabad, in northern Iraq of today, Kurdish Iraq. This palace was discovered and excavated by a French team, and they found there the text or royal inscriptions that decorated this palace, the walls of this palace. If we go back to the biblical account about the conquest of Samaria, we can understand that it was Shalmaneser V, the former king, that took Samaria and conquered it. But actually, if we read the biblical text carefully, we can see that it is not so clear. Because at the beginning, the name Shalmaneser is mentioned, but later on it is said that the king of Assyria was the one that conquered Samaria and exiled or deported its population to the east. In the inscriptions of Sargon from Khorsabad and other inscriptions of this king, we see that again the decision to finish with Samaria as an independent vassal state was because a rebellion that took place, that Samaria participated, again with the support of the Egyptian king from the south. Maybe the menace to the Assyrian interests explained the harsh decision to finish with the northern kingdom as an independent state and now establish a province, a new province, Assyrian province that bore the same name, Samarina, which is very similar to Samaria. The long siege over Samaria that is portrayed in the biblical text, in the second book of Kings, we can explain it probably because the fact that it started in the time of Shalmaneser V, but in those 3 years, Sargon took the power in Assyria proper. It means that the siege over Samaria no longer continued, but only when Sargon established or stabilized his throne in Assyria proper, now he had the time to go back with the army. In his inscription, Sargon II portrays how Samaria, the kingdom of Samaria, the northern kingdom of Israel, was turned to be a Assyrian province, governed by an Assyrian governor. And this calls for an explanation about when we see the map of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, we see that they actually controlled almost the entire Fertile Crescent from the Persian Gulf in the southeast to the Sinai Peninsula, including all Mesopotamia, parts of Iran, part of northern Syria and southern Anatolia, and the Levant. How do you control such vast areas? And this goes to the idea of dividing those territories to provinces. Each territory was governed by a local Assyrian governor. Each one of these governors, these high officials, were accountable to the king. So it means that they had to pay an annual tribute from the province, collect taxes and give them to the crown, and also, when time needed, to participate with their local armies in the yearly campaigns that were led also by the Assyrian monarch. So in this map you can see how the vast territory of the Neo-Assyrian Empire was divided into those provinces. One of them is the province of Samarina, the former kingdom of Israel, the northern kingdom that we find in the Bible. The provincial system in the Neo-Assyrian Empire was actually one of the means to control the territories. So if we look at the map of the provinces in the Neo-Assyrian Empire, we can see the hierarchy. We have Assyria proper, with the king in the center, the provinces, and also the vassal states, which means the kingdoms who are still independent, but they have to pay the annual taxes and, of course, to follow the vassal treaty with the Assyrian king. The Assyrians prefer the model of the vassal state. It means that they will receive the taxes every year. Remember, show me the money. And they don't have to bother with domestic affairs, with the education of the subjugated populations, the health things and constructing activities. But between the total annihilation of a vassal state, which will become a province, and the establishment of a province, there was an intermediate stage of tearing apart territories from the state and reducing its economic and political power. This is what we saw, what was happening with the northern kingdom of Israel. And later, it will happen again with Judah in the time of King Hezekiah and Sennacherib, the son of Sargon II. In one of his royal inscriptions that was found in Khorsabad, in Dur Sharukin, the capital, Sargon II refers to the leader of the rebellion in the west, the kingdom of Hamat. And in this inscription, he refers to the deportees that were taken from Hamat to the east, but also he mentions deportees that were brought from the east and settled in the territory of the subjugated kingdom. This two-way deportation policy is also one of the known features in the imperial mechanism of the Neo-Assyrian Empire that was later on also imitated by the following empires. The manpower that was taken from the conquered kingdoms was used in all kinds of ways in the empire proper. For example, in this inscription we see mentioning of conscription of military personnel from Hamat into the Assyrian standing army. In this case, we are talking about units of charioteers, horsemen, and also foot soldiers. The same thing happened with the professional charioteers that were taken from Samaria, that we find also in the inscription of Sargon from Khosabad, where he mentions taking 50, or in other inscription even 200 chariots, and incorporating them into the Assyrian standing army. When we talk about conscription of military personnel into the Assyrian army, it is interesting to go back to the depiction of what was happening in Samaria after Sargon conquered it. In his inscription, Sargon mentions that he took 50 or maybe 200 chariots from Samaria and incorporated them into the Assyrian standing army. Legal and administrative documents that were found in the arsenal of Kalach, one of the cities of Assyria, mention chariot warriors with Hebrew names like Nadaviahu, the charioteer, and also the Samarian chariot unit. It had been suggested that one of the commanders of that unit, we know his name, Shammah, he became the personal trainer of the crown prince. It means that the deportees, the professional deportees, had a chance to start a new career in the Neo-Assyrian capital or in the Neo-Assyrian army, and that explains also why the deportation mechanism was so successful in incorporating manpower for the needs and the interests of the empire. This is one of the many examples of the efficient way the Assyrians used the professional manpower from the conquered population to their benefit. From the inscriptions of Sargon II, we learn that after conquering Samaria and turning it into a Assyrian province, he brought there also deportees from the east, including from the Babylonian town of Kuta. This explains why the Samaritans, which were the rivals of the Jews, especially in the Second Temple periods, are known in their Jewish names as the Kutians, meaning the people from Kuta. This episode is also portrayed in the Bible, in the biblical story, about the people that were brought to Samaria after its conquest by the Assyrians, and they were living in Samaria. In the biblical account of the conquest of Samaria, in the second book of Kings, chapter 17, we read a very interesting story. The deportees that were settled in Samaria were not worshipping the local god, and therefore he sent against them lions who started to devour them. Therefore, the Assyrians were looking for an Israelite priest who was brought there to teach them the local cult of the local god. This is the Jewish or Judean explanation regarding the story of the Samaritans, the local population living in Samaria that actually were brought from far away. Talking about lions attacking the people, it is worth mentioning the royal seal of the Assyrian kings. In this seal we can see the king actually struggling against the lion and stabbing in the heart with a dagger. The Assyrian king was the only one who was allowed to kill a lion. The royal Assyrian seal symbolizes the role of the king. He is the one who overcomes chaos and also establishes the divine order in the land. This is actually his role as the leader of the entire Assyrian population, but also the entire world. The map that we see in front of us now, the map of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, show us also the importance of the main roads, which were actually the nerve system of the empire. The royal roads, the main roads, served the Assyrian intelligence service and also the economic system of taxation and trade. Therefore, they were strategic. We can learn about the Neo-Assyrian road system from a later text from the 5th century BCE, written by the famous Greek historian Herodotus, who describes the Persian imperial road system. And there he refers to the road stations that were manned by dispatched riders that were riding on their mules or horses a daily ride from one station to another, thus transmitting the royal messages and the news from the periphery to the center of the empire. So this was actually the nerve system. Those road systems are known also from the Neo-Assyrian text in the name Bit Marduti, biblical Beit Netivot, which appears also in the Bible. The most important messages that were transmitted via those road stations and the imperial roads were news about rebellions in the outskirts of the empire, especially in the subjugated lands, like what happened in the year 705 following the sudden death of Sargon II in battle in what today is southern Turkey. The king was leading the army but was attacked and ambushed and died. His body never recovered. You can imagine that the news about the death of the monarch actually started a rebellion in the entire empire in all directions. In Babylon in the south, in the eastern frontiers, and also in the west. In the west, the rebellion was led by a coalition of 3 kings. The king of Sidon, the Phoenician city-state in the coast of Lebanon, Ashkelon, in the southern coastal plain of the land of Israel, and also Judah, led by the king Hezekiah. Sennacherib was lucky enough to be old enough and had a lot of experience as the heir to the throne. From the documents that we have, we know that he had an important role as the chief intelligence officer of his father. All this helped him actually to stabilize the throne in Assyria proper, and after securing the southern frontier in Babylonia and later on the eastern frontier in Media in the east, he had now the time to arrive to the west in the year 701 BCE. Sennacherib decided to abandon his father's new capital, Dur-Sharukin, and moved the capital to Nineveh, one of the oldest Assyrian towns, which became his royal city and also the last of the Assyrian capitals. Nineveh, known as the great city in the Bible, especially in the book of Jonah, where it is said that it took 3 days in order to walk its fortifications, its walls. It was a huge metropolis that included not only the royal palaces, but also the arsenal, the central military camp. The enormous wall of the city had 15 gates, as can be seen in the map. Sennacherib supplied water to the city by building an amazing aqueduct, more than 20 kilometers long, that started north of Nineveh and brought water to irrigate the city and to supply water for its citizens. One of the greatest achievements of Sennacherib in his new capital Nineveh was the building of his new royal palace, the palace without a rival, which its walls were decorated with reliefs depicting the king's military accomplishments, building projects, and religious activities. The most famous relief that was discovered in this palace already by Layard depicts the siege battle over Lachish, the second most important city in Judah. Here we see part of a relief from Sennacherib's palace in Nineveh, depicting a battle scene in Mount Lebanon. The Assyrian soldiers are fighting against local Sidonian Phoenician soldiers that belonged to the army of the king of Sidon, whose name was Luli. Here we see a model of the palace without a rival, and hall number 36, where the famous relief depicting the siege battle over Lachish, the second most important city in Judah, in the time of Hezekiah, the rebellious king who fought against Sennacherib's army. Sennacherib's campaign against Judah, which was part of his third campaign against the West in the year 701 BCE, is one of the most detailed and complicated biblical events. The problem that we have is that the biblical account is giving us actually two pictures. On the one hand, we have Hezekiah's surrender and paying the tribute to Sennacherib, but on the other hand, after Hezekiah's surrender, we see that the Assyrian army is coming again to Jerusalem. After the description of Hezekiah's surrender, the biblical text continues with another story which portrays how the emissaries of Sennacherib were sent to Jerusalem again to convince the king and the people to surrender to Assyria. How come then that we have a second story about the siege over Jerusalem after the city already surrendered to Sennacherib? The explanation to this complexity is that probably the biblical account has two different stories. One short story that depicts the surrender of Jerusalem, and another one that we found also in the book of Isaiah, which portrays the important role of the man of God, the prophet Isaiah, in the deliverance of Jerusalem because of the divine intervention. When we compare the biblical account with the Assyrian account in the inscriptions of Sennacherib, like we see here in the Rasam cylinder, we see that probably the first and shorter account is the more historical one. The Assyrian account of Sennacherib on the Rasam cylinder that you see in front of you portrays how Sennacherib destroyed 46 of Hezekiah's fortified cities, and also how he came on Jerusalem and besieged it. Following the siege on Jerusalem and his surrender, King Hezekiah had to give territories from his kingdom to his enemies, the Philistine kings, on the southern coastal plain of the land of Israel. In this way, the Assyrians reduced Hezekiah's kingdom and also disabled his economical power so he could not rebel anymore. It is interesting to compare the biblical account with the Assyrian text of Sennacherib, because we see a similarity in the quantities of metals that the Assyrian took from Jerusalem in silver and in gold, as you can see in the text in front of you. In the next scene, we can see the deportees taken from Lachish and deported to Assyria and other territories in the eastern parts of the empire. The conquest of Lachish was a serious blow to the kingdom of Judah, since it was the second most important city in the kingdom, and also we can say the capital of the most fertile area of the kingdom in the Judean lowlands. Following the Sennacherib campaign, it seems that Judah no longer rebelled against Assyria. We now reach the days of the last monarchs of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Actually, this was the peak of the empire, but also the beginning of the end. I'm talking about the days of King Esarhaddon and his son Ashurbanipal. In these times, Assyria achieved the greatest military and political achievements. We are talking about invasions to Egypt and conquest of also of Elam, the rival of Assyria in the east, today modern Iran. But it seems that internal problems, civil war, and probably also decadence ended this amazing empire. We see in front of us a famous stela of Esarhaddon from Zencerli, which is southern Turkey of today, where we see the subjugation of Baal, the king of Tyre, and also a Cushite prince who is actually tied in the hands of the Assyrian king. In the vassal treaty, we see also that the king of Tyre cannot open a letter that was sent to him from another king without the presence of an Assyrian emissary that was actually staying or stationed in the palace of the local subjugated king. In the scene that you see in front of you now, from the time of Ashurbanipal, the last great king of Assyria, we see him and his queen enjoying a nice meal in the royal gardens of Nineveh. The servants are playing and giving them food, but if you look carefully, you can see on the left side of the scene, on one of the trees, the beheaded head of the king of Elam, Teuman, who was killed in battle when the Assyrians conquered the capital of Elam in the year 644. This is probably one of the last achievements of Ashurbanipal before the beginning of the end. In the Bible, we have scarce information related to this period of time. The names of Esarhaddon and Ashurbanipal appear in the book of Ezra. In one case, we see that in the time of Esarhaddon, people were deported from the land. We don't know exactly in what circumstances. And also in the time of Ashurbanipal, probably in his biblical name, Osnapar. Both are mentioned in the book of Ezra from the Persian period. We have almost no information about the last years of the presence of the Assyrians in the land of Israel. Probably the vacuum that created after the disappearance of the Assyrian army from the region was filled by the king of Judah, Josiah, who took the opportunity to conquer territories that once belonged to the northern kingdom of Israel, when the province of Samarina, the Assyrian Samaria, no longer existed. But soon after, we see that the Egyptian army interferes and enters, and now taking control over the territories that once were part of the Assyrian Empire. One of the greatest achievements in the time of Esarhaddon and Ashurbanipal was the conquest of Egypt. The rival of the Assyrians already from the 9th century. Remember that Egypt, the kingdom of Egypt, always was supporting the rebellious kingdoms in the west against the Assyrian interest. So the goals of the last Assyrian monarchs, Esarhaddon and Ashurbanipal, was to conquer Egypt. And this started already in the time of Esarhaddon. The attempts to conquer Egypt started in the days of Esarhaddon. Actually, in his time we have 3 occasions when he invaded Egypt. The first one was a failure. In the second one, he succeeded. And in the third time, he actually died on the way. His son, Ashurbanipal, was the one that actually took northern Egypt, the control over the delta area, as can be seen in the map in front of you. From this period of time, the days of both Esarhaddon and Ashurbanipal, we have inscriptions mentioning the Western kings that were actually participating in the Assyrian endeavors to take Egypt. In the inscriptions of Esarhaddon, we see among the Western kings also the name of Menashe, one of the last kings of Judah, who ruled for 55 years. He is mentioned as supplying manpower to the building projects in Nineveh, together with other 12 kings of the West. In the inscriptions of Ashurbanipal, the son of Esarhaddon, we see again Menashe, in this case sending troops to participate in the Assyrian campaigns against Egypt. The troops from the kingdom of Judea appear in this inscription together with other armies of the western kingdoms that were sent to Egypt, some of them dispatched on boats or ships from Phoenicia, from Sidon. The participation of Menashe, king of Judah, in the Assyrians' endeavors to conquer Egypt, and also him sending manpower to build Nineveh, is actually a demonstration of his policy as a loyal vassal of the Assyrians. It seems that he learned the lessons of his father Hezekiah and became the most submissive and loyal king of Assyria. In the eyes of the Bible, Menashe is the most corrupted from all the kings of the house of David in the kingdom of Judah. He is blamed for the destruction of the kingdom and the destruction of the temple, and of course the Babylonian exile, because of his misdeeds, his religious corruption, introducing foreign gods into Jerusalem and the temple. But in historical retrospective, Menashe's submissive policy during the Assyrian century actually saved the kingdom of Judah from the fate of her northern sister, the kingdom of Israel, and helped her survive the Assyrian dominion. So if we think it over, maybe we owe our existence here as Jews today in the land of Israel to Menashe, who didn't let the Assyrians exile the Judeans from the country because of his submissive policy, and therefore we were not exiled by Assyrians, but Babylonians, who allowed us to maintain our religion and national identity in exile. So when the Persians allow us to come back, we could do it and rebuild the second temple and continue the Judean and Jewish history through all the centuries.